Hello, friends. We'll see how long I last before my kids are yelling and screaming and coming to get me. Okay, this segment or episode or whatever the heck I'm calling these videos is going to be about the three branches of government. It is estimated that 70% of American citizens cannot name the three branches of government. And if that is you, this is for you. I find that extremely disturbing. And quite honestly, about a year ago this month, I fell into that category. But after a ton of reading, taking different classes, and just learning and soaking in as much as I could, I can at least name the three branches of government. We're going to talk about that today. So the first one is the legislative branch of government. The legislative branch consists of two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Their job is to make laws. That's pretty much it. Very simple. A law starts as a bill that someone either in the House or the Senate writes, and then it goes through a process of voting to get a majority vote before it gets passed off to the second branch of government, which is the executive, consisting of the president on the federal level, or the governor if you're talking about individual states. The executive branch is made up of the president or the governor and their cabinet. Their job is to see that the laws are followed, to enforce the laws. They also have I don't want to say smaller jobs, but another area that the executive branch is supposed to deal with exclusively, at least on the federal level, is foreign policy. And they did that so that individual states weren't trying to negotiate treaties with foreign governments and creating unnecessary competition and conflict between the states and even the federal government. So kind of funny that sometimes we'll see pictures of governors recently with looks like foreign diplomats of some sort, and kind of wonder what's going on there because that's a little bit out of their realm. But anyway, that's the executive branch. The third branch is the judicial branch. Judicial branch is our court system designed to settle disputes and interpret the law. We find ourselves in kind of a tricky situation nowadays where the judicial branch is legislating from the bench. You'll hear that terminology a lot, or at least I do. Legislating from the bench, meaning essentially the branch that was designed by the founding fathers to be the weakest of the three branches and have the least amount of power, is essentially making law based on the way that they are ruling court cases. Perfect example, let's talk about voter ID in the state of Pennsylvania. So back in 2012, voter ID in the Pennsylvania legislature was written as a bill. It passed the House, it passed the Senate, and the governor at the time, who was Tom Corbett, actually signed it into law. And had that actually stuck, I doubt we would be in the situation that we're in 2021 with a most likely stolen election from 2020, because voter ID, you would have to prove you are who you say you are when you actually go to the polls and vote. What ended up happening was there was a felon, I believe it was out of the east side of the state, who was released from jail, served his time, and he argued that voter ID was unconstitutional because he wasn't able to get a driver's license, and therefore he couldn't vote. So it was voter suppression, it was unconstitutional. He took it to court, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which is insanely biased and does a ton of legislating from the bench, overruled the law and deemed it unconstitutional, and therefore voter ID in the state of Pennsylvania actually never went into effect. And so here we are. Now, the challenge that presents for us moving forward is that since it went that direction, and there is now a court case precedent that is declaring voter ID in our state unconstitutional, it's going to be really difficult to ever get it back in motion or ever really get it back into law. There are ways to do it, but it's not going to be easy. One of them is it would have to end up on a ballot during an election where the people could actually vote on it, or it could become an amendment to the Constitution. I guess maybe that's like one and the same, but neither of those processes are quick and kind of puts us in a little bit of a bind with election integrity in the state of Pennsylvania, which is one of the main reasons why we are pushing for an audit of the vote for the 2020 election. If you haven't already seen the petition and you are a resident, a registered voter in Pennsylvania who voted in the 2020 election, go to auditthevotepA.com, read the letter we're sending to the legislature, sign the petition. I think that's one of our last ditch efforts at rectifying anything, any of the irregularities or any of the disaster that was the 2020 election, at least in our state. So Legislating from the bench has got to stop. How do we do that? Well, I think it starts with education. Most people, my generation and younger especially, I'm 41, just don't know what our government was, what it was designed for in the first place, how it was supposed to work, why it was set up that way. And so as decisions are made and kind of things happen, because we don't even recognize that it wasn't what it was supposed to be, our freedoms are being ripped out from under us. Laws are being changed from the courts when it was never designed to be that way. But if we can recognize it, get ourselves educated, and find out what was the intention, the founding fathers actually had a, they weren't perfect men, far from perfect, but government. The main difference in the way the United States was set up and compared to every other model of government at the time in the world was that rights came from God. This was other governments, not Americans. Rights come from God. God gave rights to a king or a monarchy, and the king then gave the rights to the people, and everything was structured based on that. The Americans, after pledging their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor, and literally laying it all on the line in the Revolutionary War, signing the Declaration of Independence, there were 56 men that did that. They knew they were signing their death warrant, that their heads were going to be on a chopping block, and at some point the British were coming, for lack of a better way to say it. They fought the Revolutionary War, which was 8-year-long battle. So 1776, the Declaration is signed. The Revolutionary War was fought for 8 years. That takes us into 1784, when they won the last battle, started writing the Constitution, and it took a while even after that before it was officially ratified and accepted as a document. But after going through all of that, they did a ton of study, and they said, we want a government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And the way we're going to do that is rights are going to go this way. God is the supreme creator. He created all men equal. God gives our rights to people, and the people are going to give the rights to the government. So the government can only have the power that we, the people, give it. And the verbiage is in there, either the Declaration or the Constitution, where it says that the government receives its just powers from the consent of the governed, and we are the governed. So we have to essentially give government our consent for them to have any power whatsoever. That was their vision. And that is what makes our country so special and so unique and so different than any other government, and so free. It's why people are coming here in droves, trying to climb the wall or do whatever it is that they're trying to do to get into our country, because no other system of government is set up that way, that believes that God is a supreme being who gives rights directly to people. They call those inalienable rights. That term is also in the Declaration. I can't remember if it's Declaration or Constitution or preamble or specifics of that. I'm still learning myself. But a supreme creator gives us our rights that cannot be taken away because they come directly from him, and then we give our rights to the government. And I think the government has a little bit more power than the founding fathers initially intended for them to have. They were incredibly distrustful of power because of what they saw with King George in Europe, and how the French Revolution and just everything they had been through historically at the time. They were very, very distrustful of power. And so that is why they separated our government into 3 branches. Now, there's a little bit of a myth going around these days that says we have 3 co-equal branches of government that I just described: legislative, executive, and judicial. They're actually not co-equal. They're separate. And the reason they separated them was because of their distrust for power. They didn't want any one branch to ever be able to have too much power, rise up, and rule over the people without the people's consent. So they separated it. However, it is very clear in their journal writings, in the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers are essentially a collection of journals written by John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. And it was their thought at the time of what they were thinking when they wrote the Constitution. And it is essential to understand, in order to be able to kind of interpret things, even as they're coming today, to have a foresight of what was in their head at the time. Why did they write it this way? So that you can make the right decision, at least in my mind, of keeping our country free, keeping us a constitutional republic, and not a full-blown democracy, which I'll get into in a second, or socialist communist nation, which we seem to be rapidly on pace for. But it is fixable. We just got to get ourselves educated. So where was I going with that? I knew it. There's my kids. Where was I going with that? Okay, tell her I'll be in. Just give me a few minutes, okay? Lost my train of thought. Executive branch. What were we talking about? Separate branches of powers. Okay, so they're not equal, but they are separated. The legislative. So you read the Federalist Papers, you read books and journals, and the founding fathers did a lot of writing. There's like plenty of people say, well, how do you know what they were thinking? Well, you read what they wrote. They wrote an awful lot. And you can easily see that they intended the legislative branch to have the most power because it was closest to the people. So when we're talking about the federal government, you hear the term Congress. Congress refers to the House of Representatives and the Senate within the federal government. When you're talking about individual states, which was another brilliant thing that the founders set up, originally it was 13 colonies, it became the 13 states. They had a vision. They wanted those states to function almost like independent countries themselves, so that the people could call the shots in the individual states where they lived. And the federal government was really supposed to have a very limited power and be more of an administrative resource to step in and keep the countries united and that type of thing. It wasn't really supposed to have all this crazy power that we're seeing today, where they want to restrict our gun laws and all this free printed money that we get and just all kind of insanity, universal health care, all that stuff. That wasn't really in the minds of the founders. And people will argue and say that, well, that was a long time ago. The population wasn't as big as it is today, and things have changed. And I completely agree. But what is often misunderstood about that is that the reason it is vital to go back to those founding documents and read what they thought is because they absolutely believed, they knew that things were going to change, times were going to change, and they wanted it to be able to change with the times, which is why they added in the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution the fifth article in the Constitution that allows for it to be amended. So they wanted it to be able to change. They just wanted to make sure it wasn't a shotgun passionate decision, but that it was done by the majority of the people and by the people. And that's why our process is what it is today. When you get things happening like voter ID in 2012 from Pennsylvania, what you find is that it went through the proper channels so that it was representative of the people, the House, the Senate, the governor, and then one person took it to a court where another person, essentially two people, overturned something that went through the necessary channels to make sure that the majority of people actually wanted it. And that's why legislating from the bench is so dangerous. And we've got to get good justices in there that will not do it anymore. And they know the Constitution, they understand what the founding fathers meant by it, and they're willing to rule based on that, because it's the only way we're going to maintain our freedom. So the branches are not co-equal. The judicial branch was supposed to be the weakest of the three branches. It was not supposed to have very much power. It was there to settle disputes when disputes could not be settled otherwise. And that was really it. But today we're in a little bit of a mess. I did have notes, and obviously my kids are yanking at me. So let's see. Oh my gosh, is that it? Why was I talking so long when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to say to you guys? Voter ID, Pennsylvania not legislating from the bench. I'm going to do another series on slavery and kind of the not so great areas of our country, because plenty of stuff happened along the way that were not good. But if you also read into history, you will see that Americans have done the best of any of the human race in any other country to try to right their wrongs. And even though we did have slavery, there were quite a few of the founding fathers who signed the Declaration of Independence, I shouldn't say quite a few, there was a handful of the founding fathers that signed the Declaration of Independence that actually refused to sign the Constitution because it didn't immediately abolish slavery, and they didn't want their name attached to that. And so it's really fascinating to study those particular founders and everything they did to fight slavery up front, yes, and then how to pass their thought to the next generation so that eventually it could get abolished with Abraham Lincoln's presidency in the 1860s, I believe. So I think that's all I have for you guys today. I feel like I'm forgetting stuff. I can't tell if there's people on here or I don't see any comments or questions. And so I think we're going to sign off. Look at that. I did it in less than 15 minutes. 3 branches of government. Legislative is supposed to have the most power, made up of the House and the Senate, executive, president, and or governor, and its cabinet. Military, head of the military, I forgot to tell you that too. Foreign policy, supposed to, in charge of enforcing the laws. Legislative writes the laws. Executive enforces the laws. Judicial interprets and settles disputes. Judicial being the weakest of the 3 branches of government. That was my main message. We talked about voter ID, founding fathers' form of government, what makes us different, God, give the rights to the people, people give the rights to the government, as opposed to God giving rights to a king who gives it to the people. Oh, that was it. I knew I was forgetting something. I'm glad I hung on. 15 minutes. Okay. So you hear the word democracy thrown around an awful lot today, especially on the mainstream news media, which you got to be really careful because best I can tell, they're basically run by the Chinese Communist Party and our CIA, which is the most corrupt of the three-letter agencies. And that you'll hear that word democracy. This is a threat to our democracy. There's different news, I don't know what you call it, mashups of talking heads on TV saying the exact same thing in every part of the country, which makes absolutely no sense. They can't come up with anything original. It just goes to show you that it's propaganda being meant to push a narrative and brainwash folks that still think it's real news. A democracy, a full-blown democracy, is mob rules. Democracy means the majority rules. We were not designed that way. The United States government was designed to be a constitutional republic, and the difference is a republic protects the individual's rights. So in a republic, the individual is actually protected from the majority, so that if the majority of people rule one way, but it's going to infringe on a God-given right to the individual, there's protection against that. So we are a constitutional republic. We have democratic processes that we use to run things like elections and make laws so that our government is a people-represented government, so that when something goes into law or elections, for example, that are supposed to be free and fair, they want to make sure that the individual people, actually the majority of us, are voting in certain ways, and so that we do have a representative government. But a full-blown democracy means it's mob rule. It means whatever the majority wants, that's what we do. And if it goes against an individual, let's just take, for example, LGBTQ stuff. If the majority of people ruled against that and said they wanted to abolish the lifestyle of homosexuality, and we don't want to allow people to even be able to live that way if they choose, our individual God-given rights, we were given free will from God to make that decision. And so the majority of people should not be able to, I don't want to say clamp down on that, but our representative government, our republic, gives protection for the individual, that if the individual would make that choice and live that lifestyle, just because the majority of the people want to abolish it, they're not able to do that. And vice versa, on the other side of the coin too, if we wanted to, let's say, gay marriage is a typical one, completely circumvented when they put that into law. When Obama put that into law, he completely circumvented the process and procedure to make sure we had a representative government, that the majority of the people, that's what they wanted. He took it straight to the courts. He didn't go through the legislature. And I believe that's because he didn't think it would pass if it went through the legislature, which means it's not reflecting the will of the people. However, it's neither here nor there. But that's just another example of why having a constitutional republic is important. It's hard to keep. You have to fight to keep it, the individual rights. But in either case, I think I gave two examples where majority of this for something or whether they're against something. In a constitutional republic, the individual is rights given to them by God are protected under the Constitution. And I think it's vital that we keep things that way. So hopefully that wasn't confusing. I don't see any more notes. My kids need me inside, so I'm going to turn this off. But this has been my second segment on the three branches of government. We talked about republic versus democracy and voter ID in Pennsylvania. We'll see you guys next time.